At dawn, the campaign against the Germans seemed like just another march of the legions. Even ranks, the hum of footsteps, the clang of metal. But within a few hours, this bronze and iron symphony turned into chaos. Barbarian spears tore through the air. Arrows shrieked as if alive. And it was in this hell that the Roman soldier stood unbending, as if he himself were part of a wall. Why did their armor endure where any other would crack under the first blow? Historians wrote that the LORICA segmentata, a segmented armor that became a symbol of Roman discipline, is first mentioned at the beginning of the 1st century AD. Its iron plates were connected by straps and buckles, creating flexibility without sacrificing protection. Archaeological findings in Carlisle and Corbridge show such armor weighed about 9 kilograms, less than a modern infantryman's bulletproof vest, but protected far more effectively. This armor was not just a warrior's garment. It was a shield wrapped around the body. Its metal segments clanged as legionaries marched in formation, as if the entire army were a single living entity covered in steel. From a distance, the Roman formation looked like a moving wave of metal that could absorb any resistance. This type of protection was called LORICA, from the Latin word lorica, which meant cuirass. There were different types: LORICA hamata, chainmail made of thousands of rings; LORICA squamata, a scale armor variant; and finally, LORICA segmentata, the pinnacle of ancient engineering. It was assembled by hand, fitting each plate to the body of a specific soldier, like armor for a gladiator who could not afford to lose. According to various sources, this armor was first widely used in the legions of Emperor Augustus, and later, during the time of Trajan, when Rome reached the limits of its power. Polybius wrote that Rome's strength lay not only in its weapons, but also in the ability to use them. And the LORICA became the instrument that transformed scattered warriors into a unified mechanism. But behind every plate lay a price. A legionary didn't just put on armor. He became one with it. Beneath the layers of metal, skin chafed raw, sweat streamed down the body inside the heated armor, and shoulders ached from the weight. And yet, when the first spear thrust struck the chest, it was precisely this pain that saved a life. The segments of the LORICA were joined in such a way that a sword blow would slide across the surface, losing its force. This was the simple genius of Roman blacksmiths. The armor did not resist the blow, but deflected it, like a wave that does not break a rock, but flows around it. A legionary struck in the chest might stagger but would not fall. His armor absorbed the energy, like modern composite plates. When archaeologists found fragments of armor in the ruins of Carnuntum, traces of deformation on the metal showed. The blows were delivered with a force that would have pierced ordinary chainmail, but the LORICA held. It saved where even a shield did not help. Thousands of years later, engineers tried again and again to replicate this formula: lightness, flexibility, and protection. But the question remained: how did the warriors of the ancient world create something that we can barely surpass even today? And perhaps the answer is hidden not in the iron, but in the one who wore it. For armor is not just metal, it is will, forging itself into a form. And with every step under the sun, the Roman legionary transformed this will into armor that could withstand not only the blow of a spear, but history itself. When a new day began with the battle signal, the sound of the tuba that broke the morning silence of the camp, the legion already knew. Today they would have to don metal again. The gleaming segments of the LORICA chilled the skin, as if reminding, this is not just armor. It is a promise to endure. War did not await comfortable conditions. Rain, mud, heat. Everything merged into an endless campaign, lifelong in duration. The training of a Roman legionary began long before the battle itself. Every day he trained in full gear, about 25 kilograms of steel, leather, weapons, and provisions. According to Vegetius's records, a legionary had to be able to run in armor for more than 1,000 paces without stopping. The weight was distributed ideally. The chest and shoulders carried the armor, the back, the food supply, the belt, the gladius sword. Even breathing was honed to automatism, and yet it was the armor that determined who would survive the encounter. The LORICA segmentata had a special design. Horizontal iron strips were fastened with straps and rivets, forming a movable shell. It followed the body's movement, bent with turns, but did not break. Modern reenactors have proven that such armor can withstand a sword blow with energy up to 150 joules, enough to cleave a shield or pierce chainmail. But the warriors called it otherwise, second skin. When a legionary fastened the last buckle, he seemed to transform into a creature of metal. This was not merely a weapon of defense, but a ritual of transformation. Caesar wrote that discipline in Roman ranks was stronger than fear, and the armor, creaking and clanging, became a symbol of this discipline. Legionaries formed ranks, 3 lines of 120 men, each in an order strictly determined by experience. In front were the hastati, heavy infantry, behind them the principes, veterans, and in the last line, the triarii, older warriors, the final reserve. Their formation resembled a chessboard, but each piece here was made of flesh and steel. The term testudo, from the Latin word for tortoise, denoted one of Rome's most famous formations. When arrows flew like rain, shields were raised overhead and interlocked, forming an iron dome. Hundreds of men stood beneath it, and only the thud of arrows on metal revealed that there were living beings inside. Enemies saw before them not an army, but a moving fortress. This fortress moved unswervingly, even under bombardment. Every soldier knew his place, knew how to maintain formation, how not to flinch when a comrade fell. The legatus, commander of the legion, marched at the front, giving orders in short phrases relayed by the centurions. According to Tacitus, a single legion in battle sounded like a unified breath. But before the armor saved, it tested. The iron chafed shoulders, the sun turned the segments into red-hot plates, and sweat streamed down the body like oil on a blade. Soldiers smeared their skin with fat to reduce burns, and straps were waxed. And still, after a 20-mile march, a back would turn into a map of bruises. Protection had a price, but also a reward. When Germanic axes or Dacian scythes crashed down on the legionaries, it was the LORICA that turned a fatal blow into a bruise. Plutarch wrote that in the Battle of Tapae, Trajan's legionaries, despite their mangled armor, suffered almost no deaths from cuts. The plates broke, but did not yield. The metal bent, but did not tear. And all this, thanks to the blacksmiths, who were called fabrici. These people were the heart of the Roman war machine. They forged armor from iron brought from Noricum, one of the empire's wealthiest provinces. There, they extracted an alloy of exceptional strength, not too brittle to break and not too soft to dent. Each segment underwent heat treatment, quenching in water and oil, and then was hand-polished to a mirror finish. The forges smelled of coal and sweat. Sparks flew like stars as the masters bent the metal. They knew that every strike of theirs could save a life. When the finished armor was donned for the first time, it rang clear like a string. This sound was not merely a symbol of strength, it was the voice of Rome itself. But why, among all the armors of antiquity, did Roman LORICA endure for centuries? The answer, perhaps, lies in its design. It did not make the warrior invulnerable. It made him resilient. It allowed them to fall and rise, to breathe and move, to stand and attack again. This was its strength. Every blow a Roman received in battle clanged against the armor, echoing in their chest. The sound of steel was the music of discipline, the rhythm of an empire that held half the world in its grasp. And when thousands of warriors marched in formation, Their loricas rang like bells of a vast temple, dedicated not to gods, but to the very idea of order. But even this order had its limits. Somewhere ahead, beyond the horizon, Rome would meet enemies whose blades would be different, heavier, wider, cruder. And it was then that the test of the lorica's strength would become a test of the empire itself. Midday over the Danube. The sun beat down, dust rose like a wall. The legion marched towards the crossing where, according to reconnaissance reports, Dacian detachments had gathered. The air trembled with heat and tension. The warriors were silent. Each step echoed with the clang of iron. At this moment, the armor ceased to be mere protection. It transformed into the sonic language of war. Every hoofbeat, every creak of a buckle said one thing: Rome is coming. According to Dio Cassius's description, the Dacians were famous for their weapons: curved falxes capable of cutting through shields and even piercing chainmail. It was against these that the Lorica segmentata was to be tested in battle. Metal against metal, discipline against fury. Trajan's warriors knew today they would face an enemy who was not afraid to die. And this is precisely what made them dangerous. The first onslaught came like a clap of thunder. Falxes descended from above, slicing through the air. The sound of impact on Roman armor was like lightning striking stone. The plates bent but held. Soldiers felt the vibration through their chests. Their breath caught, but their bodies remained intact. This was the engineer's design. The lorica did not stop the force, it distributed it. Just as modern helmets dissipate impact across the entire surface, so too did Roman armor turn a deadly thrust into a dull thud. The Dacians struck again and again. Their shouts merged with the hum of shields, the whistle of arrows. Under this sonic hurricane, the legionaries held their formation. The centurion, a senior officer commanding 100 men, walked along the line shouting short commands. His voice, hoarse from sand and blood, sounded like will itself. According to Tacitus, Roman centurions were distinguished by dying on their feet, not in flight. Their symbol, the vitis, a vine staff with which they punished for breaking formation. But today, with this staff, they raised their soldiers if they fell. There was no room for doubt in the ranks. Every legionary knew if he faltered, his neighbor would die. The first minutes of the battle stretched into an hour, then into a day. The sun dropped lower, and the armor became so hot that burns covered their shoulders. Sweat poured into their eyes. Skin under the segments chafed raw. But the formation did not break. When one fell, another took his place. When a falx broke a segment, a blacksmith in the camp was already preparing a new one. The Roman machine knew no fatigue. Archaeologists who investigated the battlefield at Tupaia found dozens of curved Dacian blades embedded in the plates of the lorica. On some, traces of cracks. On others, polished spots where a blow had glanced off. This silent evidence speaks louder than any chronicles. The armor held. The Romans called themselves scutum et gladius, shield and sword. But on this day, it was the armor that held the line. Without it, the formation would have collapsed under the onslaught. Trajan's warriors stood firm and then advanced like a moving wall. As the phalanx moved, shields interlocked, spears were brought forward, and the Roman wave crashed upon the Dacians. From a distance, it resembled a sea tide, where each wave carried lightning within. The legionaries did not run. They flowed like molten, unstoppable metal. Facts indicate that about 40,000 Romans participated in the Battle of Tupaia. Casualties, according to various sources, amounted to no more than 1,000. For a battle where the enemy outnumbered them, this was a miracle. But in Rome, they did not believe in miracles. They believed in calculation. And this calculation relied on steel. Trajan, observing the outcome of the battle, ordered the damaged armor to be collected and sent to the workshops. Every dent, every crack became material for analysis. Rome learned from every blow. And that is how the armor became more perfect. The term Fabrica Legionis denoted the field forges attached to each legion. Their weapons were not just repaired, they were improved. Blacksmiths reinforced segments with copper overlays, improved connections, and made fastenings stronger. This was the ancient equivalent of modern military technology laboratories. But the most important thing in this story is not the metal, but the people beneath it. For, as Polybius wrote, armor is an extension of a warrior's soul. And if the soul breaks, no armor will help. But if the soul burns, even iron becomes alive. When the battle subsided and the air over the field smelled of blood and char, the Romans removed their loricas. Beneath the metal, their skin was abraded, their hands trembled, but their eyes remained cold. Each of them knew, today the armor held, but tomorrow there would be a new battle, and again they would have to test not only the iron, but themselves. Because the true strength of the lorica was not in its metal, but in what it did to a person, transforming him into part of something greater than fear and pain, into part of an empire where every segment is important, and every blow is just another sound of the great Roman heart. Twilight descended upon the battlefield as the legionaries began to break down their camp. Romans never slept in an unfortified location. Every evening they built a rampart, ditch, and palisade, even if they knew they would leave in the morning. Exhausted, covered in mud and sweat, they did not remove their armor until the very last, until the guard was posted, until the sentries had taken their positions. The armor clanged in the darkness, like the chains of a beast that would not allow itself to relax. Trajan knew. Endurance was no less important a weapon than the sword. A legion could cover up to 30 kilometers in a day, carrying everything with them: tents, tools, weapons, supplies. According to the historian Vegetius, a soldier must be not only brave, but also strong in body, for fatigue kills more often than the enemy. The lorica was a test of endurance, not only for the metal, but also for the man. Towards morning, when the sun again flooded the camp, the blacksmiths were already repairing the armor. The forge smelled of coal and sweat, sparks flew into faces, metal clanged from hammers. Wet rags were placed on hot plates, steam rose in clouds, hissing like a snake. Legionaries sat nearby, watching their lorica regain its form. These scenes, repeated for hundreds of years, were the heart of the Roman war machine. Every warrior saw how iron bent but did not break, and believed that he too would not break. Archaeological finds from Vindolanda, a fort on Britain's northern frontier, showed warriors wrote home complaining not about the enemy, but about the cold and the weight of their armor. One preserved fragment of a legionary's letter read, "The LORICA chafes the shoulders, but without it, death comes quickly." These words, simple, devoid of heroism, show the true price of survival. Roman armor was not just an engineering marvel, but also a symbol of discipline. Every soldier daily cleaned the plates with sand and grease, polished them to a shine, checked the fastenings. Any rust was considered a disgrace. A centurion could punish anyone who neglected armor care, for dirt on the metal meant dirt in the soul. There was not only physical but also moral significance in this ritual. When a legionary saw his armor gleaming in the sun, he felt himself part of the empire, part of a grandeur where order and strength merged into one. Polybius wrote that the external brilliance of the army was terrifying to enemies even before the battle began. For barbarians who knew no such unity, the radiance of the Roman army seemed to reflect heavenly light. But even perfect armor could not protect against fatigue. After the Dacian campaign, thousands of loricas were worn to their limit. Some soldiers replaced iron segments with leather ones, reducing the weight. Thus emerged the lorica plumata, a rare variant with sewn-on metal feathers which combined flexibility with brilliance. However, its cost was too high. Only commanders could afford such. Trajan, returning to Rome after his victory, ordered a column to be erected in the Forum, topped with a statue of the emperor. On the bas-reliefs, carved in a spiral, scenes from those very campaigns are depicted. Legionaries and loricas building bridges, fighting, dying. Each plate on these figures is carved with love, as if the stonemasons themselves knew the armor had become part of the Roman myth. Modern historians such as Adrian Goldsworthy note that the lorica segmentata was not just comfortable, it became a symbol of the army's professionalism, where everything was calculated. Every detail functional, every fastener in its place. This reflected the very idea of Rome: order against chaos, reason against fury. And yet, within this seeming invincibility lay a weakness. The lorica's plates required maintenance. Repairs took time. In distant provinces where iron was scarce, warriors once again donned old chainmail. Historians disagree on exactly when segmented armor fell out of use. Some say the 3rd century, others the 4th. But one thing is clear: its decline was not a defeat, but an evolution. The empire changed, and with it, warfare. Opponents began to use arrows with forged tips, and cavalry demanded greater mobility. The ease of victories over barbarians was replaced by long border wars where survival went not to the strongest, but to the swiftest. The lorica, once a symbol of power, began to give way to new forms of protection. But in the memory of the legionaries, it remained an eternal standard. For them, the sound of fasteners, the clatter of metal, the gleam of segments in the sun, this was the music of their youth, a song of a time when armor still held the whole world, and when, centuries later, the ruins of old camps were overgrown with grass, fragments of these armors were still found in the earth, rusty, twisted, but recognizable. They were silent, but in their silence echoed the sound of footsteps, of those who marched forward until the world crumbled beneath their feet. Thus, the armor that once protected bodies became a protector of memory. But ahead, Rome awaited its final test, not the blow of a sword, but the blow of time. And then the question was no longer about the strength of the iron, but about the strength of the man himself within it. A century passed. The world that once trembled under the footsteps of the legions began to crack from within. The empire stretched from the British Isles to the deserts of Syria, but Rome's armor, literally and figuratively, began to rust. The metal still gleamed in the sun, but discipline faded. New barbarians, Goths and Sarmatians, came from the northern plains, armed with heavy swords and long spears. The old armor was no longer impenetrable. Historians write that by the beginning of the 3rd century, Roman armies increasingly wore simple chainmail or scale loricas. Segmented armor was becoming a thing of the past. It was harder to repair. Straps rotted. Rivets lost strength. But for veterans, it remained a symbol of true Rome, a time when steel and order were synonymous. On the borders of the empire, it was no longer citizens fighting, but mercenaries. Foederati. They wore armor fashioned after the Roman style, but devoid of its spirit. Heavy plates were replaced by flexible rings, cheap iron, leather. The fighters were experienced, but they lacked what could not be forged: faith. After all, the lorica segmentata protected not the body, but an idea. Man is part of something greater than himself. In the chronicles of Ammianus Marcellinus, there is a scene where, during the Battle of Adrianople, legionaries rush to don old armor preserved in the armories. They hope that this metal will bring good fortune, like a sacred amulet. But the armor no longer saves. The formation crumbles, the Gothic cavalry breaks through the lines, and for the first time in centuries, the Roman army loses not a battle, but its confidence. When the smoke of battle clears, bodies remain, covered in cracked plates. Archaeologists who investigated those fields found remnants of loricas with slashes from spears and dents from axes. The metal withstood the blows, but now it did not save. The enemy struck from above, from horseback, and armor designed for infantry engagements could not protect against such power. The term contis denoted a cavalryman's long spear, a weapon that changed the rules of the game. Its blow was delivered with the full mass of the rider and horse, and no lorica could fully dissipate such energy. With each decade, armor became thinner, lighter, giving way to mobility. The empire, once reliant on the discipline of its legions, was transforming into a state sustained by mercenary power. But still, even in this twilight, the old Roman metal continued to speak. On border outposts in Britannia and Gaul, plates of segmentata were still found, broken in half, but carefully buried with the warriors. Perhaps they were buried not as people, but as symbols, the last fragments of an era where armor was equal to honor. Evidence from Noricum, where Roman iron was once mined, shows that in later centuries, smelting became cruder and control weaker. Blacksmiths no longer hand-forged each segment for a specific warrior. Mass production destroyed uniqueness. Where once each armor was personal, now armor became merely a thing, and a thing devoid of meaning ceases to be protection. Polybius once wrote that the Romans prevailed not by numbers but by skill. But in the final wars, this skill dissipated. The army, accustomed to ideal coordination, increasingly acted in disarray. Centurions, those who held the line and the spirit, vanished as a class. Without them, the armor lost its heart, for even the strongest steel is worthless if there is no hand to hold the line. Nevertheless, even weakened, Roman armor remained an inspiration. Barbarians who sacked Rome wore captured armor as trophies of strength. They copied the form of the segmentata, not understanding that its secret lay not in the metal, but in the order that held that metal together. Archaeological findings in Ravenna and Carthage show that even in the 5th century, some commanders of the Eastern Empire continued to use segmented elements in their cuirasses. They believed that this style carried the blessing of old Rome, as if the very spirit of the empire hid in the curves of the iron. But history is merciless. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, the lorica disappeared from battlefields. It was replaced by chainmail, lamellar armor, and plate breastplates of barbarian kings. And yet, when modern archaeologists unearth these rusted segments, even after 1,500 years, they look alive. The metal that forged the destiny of a continent still seems to remember the warmth of hands, the sweat, and the blood of those who wore it. The lorica did not die. It simply became invisible. It transitioned from steel to memory, from memory to an idea. And today, when engineers create armor from Kevlar and titanium, they replicate the same principles: impact distribution, flexibility, resilience. What the Romans invented still lives on in every soldier on whom a plate gleams. But the question remains, if the armor of Rome withstood blades and time, can the man it created endure the test of an empire's fall? The answer to this question begins not on the battlefield but in silence, there, where steel first touches skin and man decides what will be stronger, metal or heart. The Eastern Empire, Byzantium, inherited not only the laws and roads of Rome, but also its armor. Here, in the mosaics of Constantinople, the lorica found a second life. It was no longer the same. The plates elongated, became smaller, forming lamellar armor. But the principle remained: flexibility in movement and hardness in impact. Imperial cataphracts, heavy cavalry, armored from head to hoof, became a new embodiment of the old ideal. Iron now protected not only the man, but also the horse. But along with craftsmanship came a new philosophy. If the Romans forged armor for strength, the Byzantines did so for survival. The empire lived surrounded by enemies, Persians, Arabs, Slavs, and each plate now was valued not for glory, but for the continuation of peace. The masters of Constantinople created a school of military art, where armor became not a symbol of conquest, but a shield of civilization. In Byzantine chronicles, descriptions are preserved of how cataphracts went into battle. When the sun touched their armor, wrote the chronicler Skylitzes, it seemed as if a living wall of light was moving. These words, an echo of ancient Rome, show that even centuries later, armor continued to carry the same idea: order, discipline, grandeur. But steel, like empires, is not eternal. By the 12th century, Byzantine armor was replaced by Western knightly plate armor. Europe forgot the Latin word LORICA, replacing it with the French armure, and yet the meaning will not vanish. Any armor, from the Crusades to Napoleonic cuirasses, carried within it the genetic memory of Rome. Today, archaeologists extracting pieces of LORICA from the earth see not just metal. They see the trace of human will, which refused to be naked before chaos. For armor is not about iron, but about the fear that man managed to overcome by imbuing cold metal with meaning. And perhaps that is precisely why the LORICA did not disappear completely. It lives in every aspiration to protect oneself not only from the blade, but also from time.